if I wrote a piece of fiction that had most of the characters as white middle-class men, that's kind of not the real world. That's just the world I happen to live in. So if everyone tells that same story, then everyone else outside of that depiction becomes invisible. So we're kind of creating a world that doesn't exist. And by creating that world and people absorbing that world, it perpetuates it and actually brings that word into existence. And that's the way I kind of see it. So for us, it was really important that everyone behind the camera, production, DOP, writers, the society was kind of reflected.
So I'm really, really happy that in our company this afternoon, we have Akin Akinsuki, who is director and writer at Five Apples. It'd be really lovely just to hear about how you started writing and producing yourself, and also more about the wonderful apple tree house, how that idea came into being.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yo, so again, thanks for having us. So where do I start? So the process of writing. So my background, basically, I studied animation at uni, and when I finished animation, I went straight into work, and fortunately working in television at MTV when it was still sort of MTV Europe. And then from there, I started working at Nickelodeon, making a lot of short form content for the channel, and also just kind of overall channel branding for the UK arm of the channel. So at that point, I'd started to experiment with writing kind of short form content that branded the channel, but wasn't necessarily hard sell. And then from there, when I left the sort of Viacom bubble, I started to think about how I can take some of the ideas we were playing around with on a small scale, and I kind of expanded it out. Now, in terms of writing, the way I kind of see writing is, and this is like purely personal, is I don't think as a writer, there's a particular time I started writing. I pretty much started writing from when I was aware of consciousness, in a sense. You know, when I was a kid, I'd watch cartoons, I'd read comics, so by kind of absorbing all these fiction and non-fictional narratives, I'd spend time daydreaming. I was basically a daydreamer. I'd sit in class daydreaming, I'd walk on the street daydreaming. And then that's the process of my writing started at that age. And I think a lot of writers kind of probably have a similar sort of trajectory in terms of the way in which you kind of, and what you're doing is basically absorbing all this information around you, studying people, studying events, studying things that happen. We tap into mythology. A lot of the stories we hear from childhood, and we start to hone everything in, and we go through a process of editing all the stuff out, and we create order out of chaos. So that's kind of my writing pretty much starts from when I'm aware of the things around that I'm watching, that I'm interested in, whether it's folk tales or whether it's Batman and Superman or whether it's Oliver Twist. You know, as you grow older, your ability to absorb the kind of more nuanced and complex parts of human behavior starts to kind of filter in. So that's kind of, for me, I don't really see my writing as starting particularly at one central point. And again, I see myself as a storyteller, and because of my background in design and animation, storytelling can be designing a logo, it can be writing a 3-piece short film, or it can be writing a 11 to 15 minute sort of like content for television or movie. It kind of spans between all those extremes, and that's kind of what I'm used to in a sense. But officially on paper, when I started writing, it was basically a case of leaving Viacom, and then I'm thinking, I've got all these ideas in my head, and it was myself and Maria Timoteo, who's my creative partner, and Will Vander. So we're the 3 creators of the show. So what we did is piece together, we took one element in terms of the environment we kind of grew up under. Like some of us had kind of lived in council estates. I've kind of got like a mixed sort of heritage. So I grew up partly in Nigeria, I grew up partly here. So I took elements from our different experiences. Maria Timoteo is Greek, Cypriot, Will Vanders is British, Ghanaian, Scottish. So we've got this beautiful melting pot of experiences that we kind of threw together. And then on the other side, because I'd worked in kids television and I'd worked particularly with preschool, I understood, like with preschool in terms of telling stories, it was always about looking for safe idyllic kind of environment, whether it's your Peppa Pig or, or whatever. You created this kind of nice little bubble, this nice little fluffy bubble. It was usually in the countryside or somewhere in suburbia, never really something in sort of like an urban kind of environment. And I'm a child who grew up in big cities. I grew up in Lagos and I grew up in London. And you couldn't, I mean, those are like really, really densely populated areas. And even within that area, you can find that sort of utopia, that childhood utopia. So that's basically what it was. It was three minds coming together thinking, you know what, there's something out there that we believe people will be able to connect with that needs to be told. And that's how we kind of came together. So effectively from that point of view, is the three of us had a lot of corporate experience, but not necessarily production experience in that sense. So we basically found collaborators. So we found Greg Boardman and Eugenia Perez, who are producers who worked on Rasta Mouse, and we connected with them, and that was it. We came together and we put the package together. We met with Kay Bembo, who then was at Children's BBC, and it was one of those weird, funny meetings. We sat on a table with her, and as soon as we started talking about the idea, you could see her eyes just pop like that, and we're like, yeah, we've done it. Literally in the first 5 minutes, it was from sitting down like this to sitting down like this. So so that was kind of like the very early, but of course, you have to make that show and you have to come up with the stories. And this kind of ties into, this is something I'll kind of explore a little bit more, the front and the back end, because as always with these things, when you're telling stories, again, having come from a corporate background, a lot of our myth makers, I use the word myth makers in terms of people that make the stories that our children consume. It's stuff that we consumed as kids and the stuff that our children consume. And I call them myth makers because as storytellers, we create a world that kind of doesn't exist, but that world comes to, we kind of, in our telling the story, we create that world. I don't know if that makes sense. The way we perceive the world is not exactly the way the world is. So for example, if I wrote a piece of fiction that had most of the characters as white middle-class men, that's kind of not the real world. That's just the world I happen to live in. So if everyone tells that same story, then everyone else outside of that depiction becomes invisible. So we're kind of creating a world that doesn't exist. And by creating that world and people absorbing that world, it perpetuates it and actually brings that word into existence. And that's the way I kind of see it. So for us, it was really important that everyone behind the camera, production, DOP, writers, the society was kind of reflected in that. And we put a lot of attention into actually building a team. And it's doable. I know I come from a corporate background and there's a lot of noise about how it's doable. It's very doable.
People will often quote that phrase, you can't be what you can't see. So how much did that play a part in when you were kind of conceiving the whole idea of Apple Tree House?
I'm kind of in two minds about that quote. I've heard it quite a lot. And it kind of captures the spirit of things as they are now. But I think sometimes a quote like that, because it's quite, it is simple, because it's simple, it kind of undermines what the pioneers do, by people who are the forefront, those who start of movements. It kind of undermines what they do in a sense. I think if you can see it in here, it can be done. But at the same time, representation is really important. It gives people a sense of belonging. It means, I think particularly for the younger ones, also for older ones, but particularly it's really crucial for the preschool kids to have it, to see, at least to get a grasp of a semblance of what they are identified within greater society. It gives them ownership. And I think sometimes politically you get people, commentators, and sometimes they're surprised why people, especially young people, feel disconnected from what's happening around. A lot of people feel disconnected. They don't feel a part of society. They don't feel like stakeholders. And these are some of the building blocks that are really important, especially from a young age. Something I say a lot to my wife is I'm very happy that I grew up in a different part of the world where I was for me, it was normal to see myself represented in society. It's a huge difference, because when I came to England and I started to meet people and look at the way society is structured, when you're coming from outside, there's things you can see that people that are born and raised into society can't see. The things you can feel that they can't feel, and they can't feel. Also, I've often found that also people who, like, Black or brown people, when they leave the UK and they go to places where it's normative to see people like them, they're shocked. Even a friend of mine, Kwaja, who's British born, but is Ghanaian. The first time he went to Ghana, it was like a moment of clarity. It was like, whoa, now everything makes sense. Because for once in his life, can you imagine you're in your 20s, and for once in your life you feel the world you feel like you're placed in a place that kind of makes sense for you as a person. He's walking down the street and I hear the name Kwajo, and he turns around and it's like there's 10 other people on the street called the same name. So there's something almost kind of spiritual about that. And so yes, it is really, really important. I don't want to waffle too much. It is really important, but at the same time, again, I'm not a big one for slogans, because I think they can articulate a truth in a certain way, but at the same time it can blindside you. I think they're pioneers, people who are at the forefront of doing things for the first time, and I think we shouldn't take that away from them. I think if you can see it in here, it can be done.
Absolutely. And I think with phrases like that, you do need to kind of dissect them and actually kind of think about what they actually mean. But you were talking about that being pioneers. And I want to ask you, given that a lot of the time, I mean, I think everybody on the panel today, we're all first in some way or other. And because of that, how do you avoid kind of cultural stereotyping? And do you feel that kind of weight of responsibility on your shoulders because you are a first? There's things like, if you had a kind of a representation of people across a channel, and they were doing all kinds of things. They were doing, you had a Black lawyer, and you had somebody who was a street cleaner, and then you had somebody who was a teacher, and then somebody else who was an electrician. You have that kind of that breadth of experience of those people. But when you're doing it for the first time, you're introducing that one show where you have that diverse mix of people. How do you make those people credible and real without falling into that kind of role, that them being stereotyped?
I actually think it's a lot easier, because everything else that's out there is telling one story. No disrespect to shows like Top Boy and stuff like that. They tell a particular story. There's a lot of stuff like that, like a lot. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff like that. So we didn't actually find it that difficult, because all you got to do is look around you and look at people around you. You're not making something up. All these people exist. They're real. They're real people. And it's that thing where I remember when my wife was pregnant, all of a sudden I'm walking around, I'm seeing loads of pregnant people. When I had my first child, pushing my child on a pram, all of a sudden I'm seeing loads of children around, or loads of little, So sometimes it's there. Are your eyes open? All these stories are there. There's nothing. There's no secret. The stories are there. The people are there. But most people are just walking around with blinkers, and that's what it is. And I think this whole process of actually having this awareness that there is a world outside our bubble is the process of descaling your eyes. That's kind of what it is. Certainly for Apple Tree House, it was the easiest. That was actually what became more of a challenge, was avoiding a situation where it feels like you're doing it by numbers. Because you're like on this quest to kind of right all the wrongs. And it's not a case, you've got to tell a story truthfully. I think it's really, some people use the word authentic, I use the word truth. You have to be true to the story you're telling. So with Apple Tree House, we had to resist certain pressures to throw all kinds of diversity, mixtures inside a story when it's not true to the story.
I want to throw this question. I want to throw this question to our other panelists today. Gráinne, you know, Pablo, very much a first. How do you make it unique, but without making it an archetype or a stereotype?
That was something we had to think very carefully about with Pablo, because we didn't want to create an autistic character on screen and say, this is what autistic people are like. Because if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So we had to think very carefully about how to create that character and how to create then 52 stories in the world of that character. And the easiest thing to do is just ask the people who know. And it just became the most joyous experience, actually, because as a producer, as a creator, you're continually seeking out originality, freshness, new stories, new ways of telling stories. And we just opened this whole world of stories that hadn't been told before, because it was the perspective on the world that we don't normally get to experience. And that perspective was really quirky and funny and interesting and unusual. And we just, through creating, I suppose, the circumstances where people who knew these stories were given a voice, you know, we just had to kind of stand back and let those stories get told in a way that would resonate with young children.
Yeah, lovely. And Vakar, your animation is very much about an Arabic family. So how do you introduce the family without that family becoming representations of every Arabic family?
I think the key about stereotyping, whether in some cases it's negative or it's positive, is about telling stories that are truthful and honest, and that really resonate with everybody. I mean, there's a show coming out called Honor on ITV at the moment, which is about honor killing of Muslims. Now, that is where you actually pigeonhole a whole faith on a very, 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 very tiny minority, and now you've established that they're all like that. So you have to pick stories that are actually positive, that give a positive view about things, and there's millions of them. I think we tend to take the easy option and create stories and create characters that everybody already associates to, already has a perception about, and that's where I think the error lies. And what we have done, we've just taken a family, any family anywhere in the world that has two kids, they live on a farm, they have their grandmothers, they are the everyday issues of life. The only difference is that in the morning, rather than say good morning, they say assalamu alaikum, and that's it. There is nothing else. There's Arabic family, Muslim family, Indian family, British family, they're all the same. We have the same desires. We get up for the same aspirations like everybody else do. So it's being honest.
Fantastic, thank you. And Iain, again, very much a first with Mustard and Ketchup. I think you probably need to explain why it's a first. And also, yeah, how do you avoid falling into a stereotype?
I think I should add, in terms of the state of Mustard and Ketchup, it is in development. I mean, arguably, it's not a legitimised concept because it hasn't reached a broadcasting platform yet. But we have had, as I'll discuss later, the BFI Young Audience Content Fund Award. So there is a level of kind of it being legitimised and seeking to fulfil its potential. In terms of stereotyping, I've been to quite a few markets, broadcasting, CMC, Children's Media Conference, ANISE, as part of my research as to the taste for a children's show that would be fronted by a gay couple. The Mustard and Ketchup are two male badgers in a same-sex relationship. And it's very important to me in the concept of the show that they live, as Akin was saying, we imagine futures that we'd like to see, and Mustard and Ketchup live in a world where nobody bats an eyelid at anyone's sexuality, and therefore it's not mentioned in the show. We don't bring it up. They don't do things. They don't go to Pride. They don't do all the kind of flag waving things that we associate with the LGBT movement. It's about them being and to fit into what you were saying as well. They just do the same as everybody else, and the problem that I'm finding initially talking to broadcasters about this pitch is that they immediately look at you and say, well, how do we know that they're gay? And that actually betrays that the broadcaster has an expectation of what a gay character should be performing like. So what I have to do to make this show a success is fight that. I need to convince the broadcaster that we don't need them to do the things that they think that the audience expect a gay character to do. And there's lots of evidence that broadcasters are generating content that fulfill the stereotype of gay life, of gay people, of loneliness, of despair, of suicidal thoughts. And these are things that are prevalent, you know, and are part of the kind of complex mixture of growing up LGBT in a kind of heteronormative world where you're made to feel different. But that for me is the challenge, is to come up with a concept which is so solid, truthful, and authentic that the partner broadcaster will have to bend on the how they're represented. They'll need to kind of drop their own assumptions, because that's what I've been feeling. The pressure I've been feeling in development is, oh, but they'll have to do gay things, won't they? For us to know, they'll have to wear sequins for us to know that they're gay. And it's like, no, it's how they relate. This is about it's about emotional development. It's not about imagery, or I'm struggling with my words, but do you know what I mean? For me, the challenge is convincing broadcasters that the stereotype needs broken.
Yeah, and it absolutely, and it's not about kind of all those tropes that people are so used to seeing, or kind of signposting that kind of, you know, absolutely. Akin, back to you. You've very, very kind of briefly said something about being, you know, having that diversity on screen and diversity behind the camera as well. How easy or difficult did you find that? And also in terms of animation, was it a difficult process to kind of carry that through to the animation elements as well?
In terms of diversity, putting together a team, I think sometimes when you come from, I didn't see that too much at Nickelodeon, because they were actually quite good in terms of diversity. We tend to look at things in terms of very much a short-term need. So if I need someone to make something tomorrow or next week, I'm looking for that person right now. And what people don't do is invest in the future, in a sense. So you kind of network, you make your connections, and you broaden your pool of people, the kind of people that you work with anyway. And you may not always need to use the person now. So for example, I'll meet up with any talent, you know, I'll meet up with them. I may not necessarily need to use them today or tomorrow, but in a year's time, I might need a Persian writer. So if I haven't made those connections, or have no one in my circle who is a creative Persian person, then when I need someone who's Persian to write a script or to help me develop an idea, I'm scrambling. And then I want the person now. And I think that's what we don't think in terms of medium and long term. Thankfully, when we kind of start making Apple Tree House, we were kind of set up to be able to reach out. And, you know, we're only 1 or 2 phone calls away from someone who's able to join the team. And we kind of spent time putting together a team that was diverse, so that you have some sort of representation in some shape or form, whether you're Muslim or you're Muslim or Indian or African or whatever, to have some sort of representation on the team. So I think the key thing is also never making assumptions, and something I actually didn't mention earlier, which is also just as important, as class, because our stories, we try to ground our stories, certainly working from the working class, kind of, you know, in terms of its location. We tend to make a lot of assumptions about the other. especially when we're not surrounded by them or we're not kind of immersed in their daily way of life. When you have a diverse team, whether it's a writing team, whether it's a production team, people can flag things very quickly. People will flag things like, well, oh, why is that there? Oh, that's not right. And then you're able to kind of circumvent it. So what then tends to happen is things are flagged during production as opposed to being flagged when it's on air on television. But even still, even with all these things in place, I'll give a very quick little story about something that happened on Apple Tree House. And when I found this out, I wasn't very happy about it, but it's something that happened. So, and this kind of alludes to the animation thing. As I said earlier, a good part of the story is done in animation form. In the animation sequences, we travel to different parts of the world. Now, working with an animation team, when you're hitting production, you're trying to hit deadlines, everything's moving fast. And as a part of the show, a little segment part of the show where they go to Africa, and it's depicted in a certain kind of way. Now, again, I grew up in Africa. One of the other creators grew up in Africa, and it's like, well, we're and somewhere along the line, and this is the inculcation of what we've been taught when we watch things. Everywhere else is depicted the way things really are. But this particular scene in Africa, it's like parched. It's like parched, like, brown earth and just like little huts. And there's a little segment, and I'm like, but by the time we kind of caught it, it was a little bit too late, and again, that's another importance in terms of the animation team, more eyes should have been on the detail of the stuff. There's only, so for us, that was like a learning moment. If someone who had just a little bit of an awareness, and that's what it is, it's an awareness.
Or it was a more diverse team. I kind of find that you're less likely to find that kind of real diversity in animation teams, but that's something that we can talk about later. Akin, thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant. I just want to now talk to Gráinne. So Gráinne, Pablo, absolutely wonderful concept. One of those things that I always wish that had been my idea, but obviously it wasn't, and we're very glad that you brought it to us. So please do just tell us about how you came up with it, little potted history of the inception and realization.
The idea, just that thing, what you said, Ros, is like every good idea, you're like, why didn't nobody ever think of that? So sitting on the sofa one day, I just thought it'd be a really good idea to create a show that created understanding about what it was like to experience the world from the autistic perspective. So at that time, my children were preschoolers, and they had a cousin who was autistic, and there were a lot of meltdowns and there was a lot of fighting. And literally, I just thought, things would be a lot easier around here if they understood where he was coming from and what the world was like for him. Because autism isn't easy. And what makes it even harder is that nearly 50% of kids on the autism spectrum report that they're bullied in school. And that's only the kids that know they're being bullied. And if you add to that, like that's since having that idea and Pablo getting made, that's probably about 8 or 9 years ago now. And even the changes in that time are huge in terms of what we understand autism to be, but still within schools, there's not enough understanding, there's not enough funding for special educational needs. And kids with autism not only have autism, but they live in a completely neurotypical world that doesn't understand them. So that just makes it harder. And I just wanted to come up with some way of telling stories that would put that autistic experience on screen in a way that kids would understand. And through the creation of understanding, we build empathy. So the idea was to come up with a concept that would put as many of the traits of autism on screen as possible. And through that exposure, create understanding and create empathy. And so we came up with a show about a little boy who's 5.5. and he has an outer world and an inner world. And when he goes into his inner world, he goes there to rationalize and strategize and practice how he's going to deal with a real world challenge or passion, because he has lots of passions as well that he gets very, very sucked into. And so in the world of his imagination, he has a group of friends. And all the friends that he has in that imaginary space that he creates himself, because he's very clever and creative, all those characters are based on traits of autism. So we put the autistic trait on screen. Mouse has sensitivity to sound and sensitivity to smell. Tang can control his arms or his energy very well. Giraffe is a complete fact boffin. He knows everything about everything. He's an encyclopedia, but he's a very rigid thinker. Noah has a lot of social anxiety, and Ren over empathizes. And so all of these characters coexist within Pablo. And sometimes in a given situation, one character shouts louder than another. One character plays a more solution finding role than another, but together they work it out. And so the idea of all of that is to say, autism is not one thing. It is not, oh, that person's good at maths, or that person has social anxiety, and that's what that person is. That person is all of those things. And in any given situation, one particular aspect of your personality will come out to get you through, or to actually create a lot of anxiety and processing difficulty than another. And the show is very much just about appreciating the other person's point of view and imagining yourself in the situation that they might find themselves in. A great quote from someone who helped us very early on, Donna Williams. She said that autism is like reality with the dial turned up. So for autistic kids, the processing of everyday life is with the dial turned up. And for some people, that might be social situations. For some people, that might be they hear everything, they even hear the electricity in the sockets. And for some other people, they absorb everything that they're taught. But all of that going on and not shutting off the things that you don't need is very, very overwhelming. And so the thing about Pablo is, you know, we're not going to get too far in creating understanding if we just have a show that's aimed at autistic kids. Pablo is for all children everywhere, and it's traveled all around the world because all the stories in Pablo are stories that every preschooler can relate to. Just for Pablo, the dial's turned up. But with that creates real drama. Like, that's conflict and drama and funny and everything right there.
And I know that you've done like an incredible job in getting, you know, like contributors, writers, performers who all have or are autistic. So how easy or difficult was that? And also, how are you kind of developing those people for the future as well?
Yeah, I feel kind of bad to say that, like, I've done an incredible job with that, because I really haven't.
Oh, yeah, when I say you, I mean like the collective you.
Yeah. Because I suppose it's like every production and every producer in this group today will say the same thing, is that you don't know how to do anything. You know, you come up with these ideas and you really don't know how to make them. And by the time you have them made, you know how to do it. And everybody says, oh, you did a great job doing that thing. And you're like, yeah. So it was really just starting off from the point of view of like, well, how are we going to tell these stories? And we had a very experienced head writer, Andrew Brenner, who had like written for children for years, very successful shows. And very quickly he realized that he wanted to get real life experiences. So that was the first step. So we started talking to people on Skype, and that's actually a really comfortable way for autistic people to meet, because they're, you know, they're within their own environment, and it was easy to get conversations going. It took a while, and it took him, he did an awful lot of talking and listening. And like the one big thing that I have learned through the whole process is the power of listening. So he really, really listened to people, and they really told him their stories. And through that, then we just were like, right, okay, well, would you like to help us turn your story into a story that might be suitable for the show in terms of a premise? And then would you like to come on and write for the show? And really he did all the work of bringing those people along. And some people just talked to him and share their experiences. Some people did premises, some people did full scripts, and some people we just couldn't create the show without now. So that was that. And then we wanted to have the voices, the actors, all come from that background as well. So we just put out one Facebook post, and we're based in Northern Ireland. So obviously we wanted to have a range of voices that would reflect sort of a wide range of experiences. And because autistic kids, I mean, our actor, Tony, who plays Noah, told me one day, he said, acting comes very naturally to autistic people because we do it every day. So the talent that we uncovered by just saying, we need autistic actors, we got a huge response. And in that first call, we got 400 candidates. We listened to them all, and we saw 40. And we have about 10 main voices in the show, but then we have loads. We kept the calls open, we kept the channels open, so that with every button and alien and crayon that came along, or crisp, because you can create fun with characters, because autistic kids love objects as characters as well. So lots of great characters. So we just kept that open, and honestly, like, it was an absolute creative joy to uncover all this talent, and they were just so full of joy to get an opportunity. Like, it would break your heart as well in one sense, because they're just coming to you so full of joy because they're getting an opportunity, but you're so full of joy because they show up prepared. They're so grateful to be there. They're actually over prepared. So you think you're going to get 4 scripts done, and they do 8. And you say, thanks for coming. And they say, thank you for having me. And if it's not what they think, they'll just say, this is our whole team. Like, you know, working in this industry all the years, people are very good at going, well, have you thought about, and what if, and where suddenly you're in a creative process where people just straight away go, no, I don't think it should be that way. I think it should be this way. And that's it. And so very straight up, very honest, and honestly, the most freeing creative process.
And surely the ambition should be that those people kind of have developed their own like performing style or writing style, and actually just go out there and do other things, so that you know, we're not always saying that if you're autistic, you're only writing on a show that is about autism, or if you're Black, you're only working on a show that's about, you know, a Black family or a Black community. So surely that, you know, it kind of feels that, you know, the ultimate ambition should be to kind of develop these people so that they can go out and they can kind of, you know, infiltrate that world that kind of seems so far away from us all, really. Yeah,
absolutely. Like, you know, all our great talent got chances on Pablo because Pablo was about autism. And we opened up our production processes to accommodate that. But if you think about going to get a job as a writer, very often the first thing you'll have to do is an interview or fill out an application form, and you'll like, so many of our team will fail at that application form stage because they'll just go, no, I can't do that. And because it is a neurotypical world that they are trying to get work in, and it's the world that has, like, we're always saying we need more original stories, we need new ideas. Like, the new ideas are right there. It's the ways of doing things that have to change to be open to those stories.
I'm talking about new ideas. What next for Paper Owl?
Well, we're currently developing Pablo Series 3 with the BBC. Don't mess it up. Which so we're going to make Pablo 8 and great. It's going to be a crossover show, and we're going to get him into school. So the ambition for Pablo as a brand is that we'll see him in a crossover from CBeebies to CBBC, and he'll be in school, and we'll have that whole world for lots of series. And then we'll do Teenage Pablo later. So we have like long-term ambitions for Pablo, because there's just so many stories to tell. We're working on a really special film at the moment, which is about a little boy's grieving journey. And that's going out on the winter solstice. So it's a moment of light in the year, hopefully, where this little boy comes to a realization that if he can remember everything, all the good things, he can remember the light. And by remembering the light, it's much greater than the grief that he finds himself, the darkness of the grief that he finds himself in now. So that's that. It's not as sad as it sounds.
It sounds lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely. Again, as long as we don't mess it up before the winter solstice. And then we've just started work on a series called Ladybird and Bee, which is about a ladybird and a bee. And that's for RTÉJr Junior, and that's basically about biodiversity, and it's a celebration of biodiversity. And it comes really from the point of view that if at a preschool level we celebrate diversity in nature, then we can also recognize the need for neurodiversity and diversity in humans as well. So that's really cute and really simple.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gráinne. Thank you. Third panelist this afternoon is Mirza. Vakar, it's lovely to have you with us this afternoon. So the project that I've seen from you is Zain and Zaina's Little Farm, which is just absolutely lovely. So why don't you tell us about it a bit more?
I'm very humbled to be with so many wonderful people and talented people. So thank you very much. I think it's good to maybe start with a story, which was one of the reasons we embarked on this project. And I was on a bus about a year and a half ago. It was a very busy bus, and there was an old lady who was standing, and there were two young kids, maybe 7 or 8 primary school kids, who were sitting on the seat. And this old lady was obviously, being moved around. And I said, look, guys, give her the seat, she needs the chair. All I got from that was, buckets of obscene words and lots of racism. And it just went on for about 2 minutes and until the bus came off. And it made me think that, how do kids become so like that? Why? What is it in society that makes kids to be able to not give up a seat to someone who's in their 90s or whatever, and then abuse someone who's asked them to give a seat? And when you start to look at things, you find that these attitudes that people develop, particularly young children, are not instructional. They're not taught. They are, I suppose, in the subconscious. When someone's watching TV and there's something about someone who's done something wrong and it's from an ethnic minority, the parents could subconsciously say, well, that's typical of them. That's typical of that minority or that sort of thing. So attitudes start to develop and begin to harden. And we found that, talking to a whole range of people, that there is a sort of a decline in what I call some of the traditional values, if I can use that word, of respect. And we sort of then did quite a lot of research and started to talk to people. And it was sort of a common thing that people felt that, yeah, things are not what they used to be, and that there needs to be a little bit more respect of the society we live in. So we sort of set about creating, I suppose, celebrating the importance of a family, respecting one another, the environment we live in, and practice mindfulness. And that's how the journey began. Then we sort of thought, look, let's see how we can create this sort of family and what it should be. And we sort of looked at sort of inspirational things that people wanted to do, always wanted to do. So the family lived in the city. Mum is a vet and dad is a shopkeeper, a grocery shopkeeper. And he wanted to live on a farm and grow produce. And mum wanted to be a vet in the countryside. And the kids love pets. They all have ducks and goats and so forth, even in the city. So we thought, well, look, let's give them that wish. And then we moved them to the countryside. And as a Muslim family, we always have our grandparents with us. So Nanny moved with them. And the film is, the episodes are about values. So we have one about neighbors, how to react and look after your neighbor. One is about respect. So we respect property, respect authority, meaning teachers and your parents, how to respect nature, how to respect animals. So each one has a theme. And Zaina, who's the main character, who's a girl in this, and she has been developed to show creativity, confidence, and communication. And she has an issue or a challenge in every episode. And she goes to her granny, who has this precious book which inspires her to do good things. And she'll say, well, look, the reason why no one is talking to you and they can't play with you because they're all busy. Why don't you go and help them? So that's about helpfulness. And then we have a rhyme and a song, very powerful, upbeat song about that particular thing. So we then sort of developed, and then came a question, who should be the family be? And this really was, I suppose, in a way, our Achilles heel in one way, that we said, look, if we can have dog families, cat families, a pig family, why can't we have a Muslim family? And that's where, it was easy said than done, because we made the episodes, took them to people, took them to broadcasters in America, in Canada, in Cairns, in everywhere in the world. And people said, oh, that's nice, but then shut the door in our face. So we soon realized that the European world in particular, or America, is not ready, or probably will not be for many decades, to have a Muslim family as an animated character. So that obviously put our plans back, because we'd hoped that we'd get some engagement. And we found that although the values were universal, they were every value that you and I as good people want for our kids and our family and society. The fact that it was a Muslim family and the woman was wearing a hijab, and that's the only Islamic element. There's no prescription, there's no religion, there's no teaching. It just, she wears a hijab and that's about it. So we then sort of gave up with the idea of going mainstream and trying to attract the main broadcasters, because they basically said, look, in a way, in confidence, that, look, guys, don't waste your time with us. It's not going to work. So we then sort of were a little bit brokenhearted, obviously, because there were just lovely values, lovely family, amazing pets, amazing things they did, lots of diversity. We have disabled people, we have colored people, we have all faiths and religions in the episode. It's a really fun based program. It's also set abroad. They go on holiday. They teach everything good about tolerance and love and respect. But we sort of failed to convince the mainstream for the reasons, whatever. So then we now have sort of targeted the Muslim market, and we've had incredible success. We're on a couple of TVs, we're on S4 channels. Every day we're getting inquiries to sort of become bigger and bigger. So in a sense, we started with a journey, and then we ended up in another destination. But we're very hopeful and optimistic that one day maybe the mainstream market might recognize the Muslim family as a nice family. So that's the sort of journey, if you like.
Is there like an English speak? Is it just an English speaking version, or do you?
Yeah, it was only designed for the UK market. It's only in English. We've had requests to dub it, but we're sort of really want to keep it in English for many reasons.
Right. Okay. And you've chosen animation, and I mean, generally, when people choose animation, it means that it's you're able to do things in animation that you can't do in live action. Is that one of the reasons why you've chosen animation? Does it give you a greater ability to maybe tackle more difficult subjects?
Sure. Well, look, we are a live action company. We make travel shows. We do this, that, and the other, and we understand live action a lot more. But when you look at preschool kids, kids love color. They love this, bang, wallop, smash, all that sort of fun, and dad bumping his head and going ouch, and a big bubble appears on his head. So in real life, you can't really do that with the budgets that we have. So the animation is a perfect medium to have fun. The animals are crazy. We could never get chickens to run in a line and sort of do funny things, or the goat to jump up a tree and then come down again. So there's lots of crazy things. And I think the color and the vibrancy and the speed can only be achieved through animation. And we use 2D with a slight hybrid of 3D. And we have fun doing it. We have fantasy ideas, and without going too crazy. And you can only do that in animation. So it's right for the preschool market, and it's fun to do.
Yeah, fantastic. A few years ago, I was speaking to the makers of Lu Barbet, which is a British Chinese animation, and I was specifically talking to them about their character design. The characters had very European features, and to be honest, if you'd seen it out of context, you wouldn't know where
Chinese
that fitted in. How have you approached your character design?
That's a really interesting question. I think what it is, this point you've just made is, I think, more to do not with creativity or content or storytelling. It's to do with commercialization and monetization. It's a pure financial thing. If I give you an example of Frozen 1 and Frozen 2, Frozen 1, and they're both beautiful films, one of my favorite animation films, has no characters of color, absolute zero, right? Frozen 2, you cannot believe it's the same film. It's full of ethnic characters. Now, that wasn't because Disney said, oh, we love diversity, we love, colored characters. Absolutely not. It was nothing to do with that. It was purely a commercial decision that that license holders wanted to sell their products around the world. The film makes more money through merchandise in China, Asia, the Middle East, and so forth. So it is a commercial decision. We stuck to our guns. We are not going to compromise and remove the hijab of the woman so we can get more commercial exposure, because as soon as I take that hijab off, I know all the channels will take it on. So I've just cut my sort of, revenue and income, and we've almost invested nearly £500,000 in this project of our own money. And we could have commercialized it if we hadn't. But I think it's a decision of commercialization rather than straight storytelling and creativity. And I think people should stick to their guns. And what is wrong with diversity? What is wrong with it? For God's sake, people, celebrate it. The world is in a blooming mess at the moment because of race and hate and issue. We should be telling people how wonderful it is to be black, brown, whatever, curly hair, non-curly hair. So I think it's much to do with making money than anything else.
Yeah. And what is, I know you have some views on this, but very briefly, what is the children's TV industry not doing that you think it should be doing?
Oh, wow. You know what? I sort of, and I hope I'm not controversial, but I think there's a little bit of irresponsibility. We are too much focused on commercialization of a lot of frivolous stuff, and we are not brave enough and honest enough to tell stories that really matter, that bring diversity, celebrating diversity, that we live in a multicultural global environment. We don't live in pockets of tribes anymore. And I feel that the problem, and more so now with the way the political trend is going in UK and Europe, in America, is that if the animators and producers do not take responsibility and have some bravery in preschool or in animation, we're going to be in trouble. I think we are probably in the most exciting time in the world, when the whole world's compass has been turned upside down. North has become south and south has become north. We've learned that what we've done in the past hasn't worked. And now we're in a position to show we've got to learn to love and work with each other. So I think all those producers are out there, please, let's start making some programs that have meaningfulness to young people, that show that we need to work and live together, that under the skin we're all the same, There is nothing else. And I think that's where we need to go. I really hope that the producers, yes, of course, you've got to make money. Without money, you don't get anywhere. But let's have some heart and soul in some animation, as some of the panelists are doing, but not enough. They're just 1%, and that's sad.
Thank you. Very impassioned. Thank you. And finally, let's talk to Iain Gardner. Iain, your project
all of that.
Your project is still very much in development. So obviously we're gonna, we'll have that in mind when you're speaking. But you're doing something that is very, very groundbreaking and cutting edge. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so thus far, my kind of individual experiments with Mustard Ketchup have been very much premised in the kind of variety TV shows that I grew up with in the 1970s, Morecambe and Wise, even going back to Laurel and Hardy. That clip reel was used in our impact assessment as part of the BFI Young Audience Content Fund, which I've received to develop Mustard Ketchup. And I've kind of got three outcomes of my development. The first one is the impact assessment, and I'll quickly try and give an overview of that, although I've just realized that when Maurice Wheeler from We Are Family debriefed me on the impact assessment, it was like an hour session. So I'll get through what I can. The second deliverable are the scripts. I've got we had amazing writers in the writers' room, people that had written on Gumball, Horrible Histories, working at the moment with Elijah W. Harris, who's written for Dead India for Netflix, which is a bit of an LGBT skewed show as well. And Kieran Hodgson, who's a stand-up comedy writer performer, has done his own stuff for BBC Radio 4 and Channel 4. So really going for kind of comedy chops in the writer's room. And the third part of my development is just to budget, because I'm a kind of novice producer, so I have no idea. I'll be getting my hand held. But just to quickly go through the impact assessment, we briefed to find out how LGBTQ people felt about representation in the media of LGBT people. We wanted to know whether positive representation could have an influence on mental health. For audience targeting, I wanted to know how young do people identify as gay? Because there's often this issue, and again, when I've been researching it with broadcasters, a lot of people have said it's not appropriate for children because they've kind of associated your kind of sexual identity with sexual behavior. And we're not talking about that with Mustard Ketchup. We're talking about a loving relationship, not necessarily. I mean, they may have sex. I don't know what they do when we stop animating them, but it's not seen on screen. And we also wanted to know what mainstream audiences would feel about positive representation of LGBT characters. So, right about age 9, children begin to understand their personal difference. And at about age 16, that's the average age of young people to self-identify as LGBTQ. From this, we determined that our target audience for Mustard Ketchup would be about 6 to 10. Because part of what we found in the research, and from my own experience growing up gay, I want to do a show where people's futures are visualized. The worst thing I remember about growing up gay, and it's been validated in the research that we've done, is that you just don't know what your future is going to be. There's no frame of reference. There's no example to look to that says you'll be safe, you'll be in love, you'll be supported. And especially as we found in the research that we're doing in current representation on screen. One of the problems in society is that LGBTQ is often a taboo subject for families, and the children often have to initiate the conversation. So obviously this reveals a need for a show with LGBT characters. And we found various reasons for why support structures for LGBT people are maybe failing. And that might be ignorance about, you know, the non-heteronormative lifestyle, the awkwardness in communicating it, and also kind of implicit homophobia, which our survey uncovered also. There is increased representation of LGBT characters. However, where it does exist, it's dominated by negative characterizations, tropes, and stereotypes. And it's crucially remains conspicuously absent in kids' media. Children's program makers, we conclude, and commissioners have an opportunity and responsibility to help realise equality and challenge misperceptions of this minority group by educating, normalising, and validating. When we did the quantitative research, so we had a version where Mustard and Ketchup were heteronormative, they were straight, it was a boy and a girl, and we had a version where they were just friends. And from that research, we found that the people that watched the gay animation, their opinions were kind of skewed by what we can only assume is a kind of latent homophobia. Because when asked, would this teach about relationships? The people that saw the gay version, there was 17% saying, "Oh no, this isn't good for kids to watch." Whereas the straight badgers, the friend badgers, it was almost didn't register. And we found this across the whole. Again, you can't see the graphs. We found it across the board. If we asked questions of our survey groups, and said, "Do you think this would be good for kids? Do you think this would teach kids things? Do you think do you think the animation would be good?" The people that watched the gay version were all like, "Oh no, we can't have that." But it's exactly the same content and stories that everybody else was being shown. It's just that we said to the one group, they're gay.
So there was actually no difference in the content. It literally was you labeling them.
We changed in one of them. We put a little bow on one of the characters' heads to, you know. I mean, I didn't have a lot of time to do the clips. I do apologise for the stereotyping of she's a girl, and for the buddy one, we just cut out. We didn't show them in bed. We didn't show them kissing. You know, it's just them hanging out. The fact that we got such strong rejections that were not expressed when watching the straighter friend one suggests that there's a homophobic sentiment in society. It solidifies the fears of LGBT people to come out, that they're met with rejection, and it shows the importance of educating and normalizing the LGBT experience through the media. Again, compared to the straight badgers and the friend badgers, which ranked in at about 2%, 1%, 15% who watched the gay badger said it wouldn't be suitable for children. And it came back. I mean, you may have noticed in that clip that those characters kissed. Now, I'm not saying that I'm wanting to have that in the content of the show. It may not be appropriate to the narrative. It may be too contentious to throw in. It could distract from what we're trying to do. But the fact that nobody seemed to bat an eyelid at them kissing when they were a straight couple shows that it's not an issue with children on whether or not characters should be kissing each other. Mickey and Minnie did it all the time. But people blow their tops when it's a boy and a boy doing it. And that, again, I mean, I'd say there might be an argument if you can get the story right to have them kiss, because you actually do need to kind of normalize these interactions and make children understand that that's just part of someone's expression. So the gay badger video either got outright rejection as being suitable for children or more suitable for an older group than the straight or the buddy version. And we can only derive from that there is, whether people are aware of it or not, that there's this kind of latent kind of homophobia.
Can I ask a question, Ian?
Yes.
So it's my feeling that LGBTQ issues and content is like the newest battleground. Do you feel like a pioneer? Do you feel like this is a bit of an isolating experience? Do you feel
I don't feel isolated because I have got angels' wings behind me. I I presented the concept, and it was a manifesto I presented at Cartoon Forum. I didn't really know what the show was. And I'm not a writer. I'm working with brilliant writers now. So I wasn't quite able to articulate the subtle differences between them as characters. Now, I had a pretty good audience and an amazing reception to my Cartoon Forum pitch. But from that, there are people planted everywhere who want this to happen. I'm working at the moment with a development consultant, a freelance producer called Lucy Pryke. Now, Lucy used to work commissioning at CBeebies and at Disney. So she's bringing a wealth of experience on board and really helping guide how I present it, where I would go with it. So I don't feel isolated in that respect, but I do feel that what we're trying to do by placing the main characters as the gay characters and normalizing it, you know, as I said earlier when Akin was speaking, we're setting Mustard and Ketchup in a universe where nobody cares. Nobody cares that they're gay, and they don't need to walk into a room and say, "Oh, excuse us, we're gay," or you know, "Oh, something's happened to us," because none of that happens. It's basically an animated Morecambe and Wise, for want of a better word. And well, I've just noticed somebody saying about other bed sharing puppets. Yes, I think because we're trying to break the expectations of what gay characters should be doing, and I've got to admit, from the surveys that we've done, I mean, because I've based them on childhood heroes of mine, I've made them have aspirations to perform. And a lot of the respondents, a lot of the LGBT respondents that we spoke to were kind of going, "Oh God, that's a stereotype because gay people always want to perform." I'm going to have to try and nullify that. I mean, what we found in the writers' room was that we weren't really interested in seeing Mustard and Ketchup perform, but we were interested in them getting ready to do things or coming back from gigs and interacting with their community, because essentially we've set them in a kind of subterranean world where they want to bring sunshine into it. They want to lighten everyone's load. Again, just by being kind and being empathetic.
Yeah.
So to fit into what other speakers have said today, it's not about making it an issue or politicizing it. It's just about saying, here are some normal people who are nice. And this is what it means to be nice and to have empathy. And why don't you try that? Wouldn't it be nice if you tried that? And
you've gone in your animation. You've gone with animal characters. So you could have, you know, as in Vakar's animation, he's gone with like humans. So you could have gone down that road. Why did you go for animals as opposed to human characters?
There's two issues. One of it is on representation. I think there are too many tropes of you know, gay physical identity, and it's quite a big, it's an equal kind of mental health problem in the LGBT community. Well, I speak as a male LGBT member. The whole kind of body perfection, you know, the anorexia in men, you know, coming in through body forms. And I wanted to avoid human characters because I wanted to avoid any kind of discussion of whether they're thin, fat, muscular. And by making them badgers, they're just basically little cuddly Paddington Clangery shaped. They're blobs. They're basically just little blobs. And you don't really question their body type because they're cartoon characters. They're almost cookie cutter in that respect. But it also harks back to, I mean, for me, the authenticity of the idea, because I only actually got the idea when I was watching a news report about the badger cull in Britain. And there was no evidence being given that the badgers were responsible for tuberculosis. And it struck me that they were being persecuted for an illness that they weren't necessarily the sole cause for. And my brain just kind of went, bing. I remember the AIDS crisis back in the 80s. And the premise of the show has obviously evolved from the original idea that it was, which was that Mustard and Ketchup live in a world where nobody bats an eyelid about being gay. However, if you're a badger, you know, and it was going to play on everybody hates badgers, but I mean, kids don't want to see cartoons like that. And we did move on very quickly from it, but really they're badgers because that's where the idea came from.
Brilliant. Iain, I'm just going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask the other panelists. I'm afraid this is probably going to be the only question we have time to ask from our audience. So we know that a lot of people listening this afternoon are quite young and trying to find ways into the industry. So what's the best way to reach out and encourage more people from diverse backgrounds into the children's media industry?
I'll just quickly fill the gap and say, I think Skillset's doing a great job in terms of training. So I would encourage people to sign up for Skillset's newsletters, because a lot of what you need to get into industry are skill sets, and opportunities are being provided. Even I was learning Toon Boom through skills, can't say it now. But also, whilst in the terms of content production, you would need to have an association with the production company. The Young Audience Content Fund is looking for new voices. I'm not a young man anymore, and I do have a background in animation, but this is the first time I've been a content developer, showrunner, whatever. So I'm kind of new talent in that respect, and I'm learning a lot. And the Young Audience Content Fund is really taking a punt on a lot of people by doing that. So I'd recommend people follow those two organisations.
Brilliant, thank you. Akin, can I ask you the same question about encouraging young people from diverse backgrounds to kind of get involved in children's media?
So, well, it depends. I mean, there's so many different strands. So, for example, are we talking about if you're an animator, if you're interested in getting into the industry, that's on one level. If you're thinking of actually creating original intellectual property, then that's kind of a slightly different thing. I would say certainly from the point of view of animation, if you're interested in animation, apart from schemes like, you have some production companies who are very open to tapping into graduates that come out of universities or art colleges. So they have certain schemes. I know Blue Zoo, for example, who's an animation company based in London. They do a lot of that kind of work where they basically hook up with institutions, art colleges and universities, and they have programs that kind of help filter students from high institutions into production, because that's always a very difficult sort of shift from being someone who's studying an art to actually earning a living and actually working. You kind of need a little buffer zone where you kind of actually learn the true skills of actually working. So I would say try and look at off the cuff. I can't think of any immediately, but I definitely know Blue Zoos definitely run a scheme where they actually hire people who are fresh out in the industry. And I'm hoping that with time, more and more production companies will have some of these schemes where they reach out to people who are fresh coming out into the industry. When I used to work with Disney used to have 6-month schemes where they'll get people in to kind of do work experience, and they'd pay them a certain amount of money to kind of, and then at the end of the 6 months, sometimes people have the opportunity to kind of, feel their way out. Again, because you're coming into a world where there are lots of different types of jobs you're not necessarily aware of. It's not always as simple as being an animator or a person who produces. There's so many different things to do. And sometimes it might be helpful actually finding one of these broadcasters will have schemes like these.
Yeah, I mean, my advice to people, if you're specifically interested in animation and you have a very unique vision, or one that you don't see on TV, is to actually just kind of build up a portfolio of your work. You either put it online or you keep it to yourself, but when you're going to see people, you've got a portfolio of work, of your abilities, of different styles, of stuff that you can do. And it's so much better to go to somebody with examples of what you can do rather than, you know, what you're willing to do. If people know that you can do something and you have a particular skill and you have a unique point of view, then that's kind of, you know, one of the first things is that you need to be able to demonstrate that you can do that. Gráinne, I'm just going to ask you, I know that we've kind of run over by a minute, but Gráinne, really, really quickly, how does, somebody's asking about research and testing your work. So once you come up with a concept, how do you actually make sure that your content connects with your audience?
Well, I think nobody knows anything on that score. Nobody really knows what's going to work. We're all taking a guess on it. But we have great broadcasters in this country and around the world that really know their audiences, and you kind of have to listen to them about their audiences because they know what works for them. I can only speak for Pablo in terms of the research that we did, but we came from the heart of that community. We wrote from that voice. And so we knew that Pablo was just a great character who was on the autism spectrum, and he was just who he was, a great character built on really solid knowledge. And we went forward with that and hoped for the best and try and just keep your audience in mind.
Yeah, and Becca, same question to you, connecting with your audience. How do you?
What it is, I have a different approach to it, really, and it's sort of extending from what you were saying, is that when you're young and you've come out of university and whatever and school and so forth, and you're trying to make a name of yourself, it's not going to work sort of you being an island. The key, filmmaking is about collaboration. It's one of those things where it takes lots of people to make even a 30-second commercial. And the way to do it, whether you're a writer, illustrator, animator, sound person, whatever, get together with like-minded people that have complementary skills and make something, do something, because you all got no money, but you've got skills. So I could write, you could animate, someone could produce, and you all want to get your name out. Now, if you could do something through collaboration, then as you say, Ros, take it to someone, say, look, I've done this. It's a spec, but look what I can do. So for me, the key is collaboration. Go and collaborate with like-minded people, make something creative, mind-blowing, different, and present it to people like Ros.
Thank you so much. That was great. A great little point to end on. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who on the panel. Thank you, everybody who's watched. Thank you to Screen Skills for hosting us this afternoon. And I hope you've taken away something from the session. And yeah, thank you, everybody, for your brilliant contribution.